Is your preschooler driving you crazy? Well, today we are going to be talking about the sassy preschool years. I'm going to talk about some of the developmental things that are going on with this age group, some of the challenging behaviors we see from them, as well as some tips and strategies to help you through one of what I've personally found one of the most challenging parenting stages. All right, let's get to it. So let's talk preschoolers. I think now they're starting to call them threenagers, which is a very apt description. I still like to refer to them as the sassy preschoolers because they really are quite sassy, aren't they? So when we're looking at the development of what's going on with preschoolers, how I like to frame this for parents is to think about the similarities between the terrible twos and the sassy preschool years, because there are a lot of similarities there. So our terrible twos, right, they're all about the physicality, lots of using their bodies, dropping to the floor when they're frustrated, hitting, biting, pinching, because they don't have very many words to express themselves. So they're relying a lot on their bodies and behavior to communicate with us. So as parents, we work with them on helping them to learn emotional regulation and to learn that those behaviors are not useful in helping them to achieve their ultimate goal of communicating a want or a need or expressing a feeling. So while we're helping shape these behaviors, trying to diminish them, at the same time as they're growing and learning, most of the toddlers are starting to gradually build this vocabulary. So we transition from the physicality of expressing wants and needs and big emotions to now having words to be able to use them to express our wants and needs and express our emotions. So I always like to say that toddlers challenge us with their bodies, preschoolers challenge us with their words. So developmentally, preschoolers are continuing to work on their independence, who they are separate from us, what control they have over their environment. They also have these huge spurts in growth of their vocabulary and are able to have these complex conversations with us about things. One thing that I always like parents to understand, though, is that they are still spending equal amounts of time in the upstairs part of their brain and the downstairs part of their brain. Now, I talk more extensively about this in my video on tantrums and meltdowns, but just for a real quick review, the downstairs part of the brain is really where the emotions are. The upstairs part of the brain is where we're getting closer to analytical thinking and more emotional regulation. Preschoolers, toddlers are mostly in the basement, and every now and then they journey upstairs. Preschoolers are spending about equal times, which I think a lot of times as parents, we fail to understand. I remember one time when my son, who was 4 years old, I can't even remember, I gave him the wrong cup or something totally silly, and he just lost it. And it was like, what? I thought we were beyond this 2 years ago. But that's what I want you to understand, that preschoolers are still going to have those same big emotions, and we still want to help them learn how to regulate those using calm tactics and calm interventions. And you can learn more about that by watching my video on tantrums and meltdowns. So some of the common behaviors that we see from our preschoolers are defiance with their words. They're just kind of sassy, lippy, and mouthy, oftentimes viewed as disrespectful. Not listening, which I'm not going to go into too much in this particular video because I have another video on how to get your child to listen. That's something that we have to work on for the entirety of our life with our children. So go back and watch that one. And then they are also working on what I like to call debating. I remember my son was a master debater. I always told him that I should have named him, but if you just let me, I just wanna, because that was all that came out of his mouth from the ages of 3 to 5. Anytime I gave him a limit, he was debating with me about it, trying to figure out how to get his want or his need met in a way that satisfied him. So that can be really, really exhausting. They wear us down with that. But I want you to recognize that what they're learning there is negotiation skills. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a different strategy that you can use to help with anybody that might be living in your house that's a debater. And then finally, again, we will still continue to see, but hopefully on a smaller scale, meltdowns and tantrums from our preschoolers. So again, I refer you back to my previous video on meltdowns and tantrums, where I share some tips that you can use to help navigate those. Okay, so let's talk some strategies. And the first strategy is for you as a parent, and that is to not take anything they say personally. I learned this from a very, very wise therapist many years ago on a home visit with a dad who had 2 teenagers who were giving him a run for the money. They were very, very disrespectful and mouthy, and his reactions to them were not making things any better. And the therapist said at that time, number 1 rule of parenting is you cannot take anything personally. And that really was an aha moment for me, because I had a 3-year-old at home at the time who was giving me a run for the money, very similar to what this dad was going through. And I was giving the same kind of responses, and it wasn't getting any of us anywhere. So once I took the perspective of looking at this through a different lens, rather than he's doing and saying these things because he doesn't respect me, and looking at them instead through a lens of he's doing the same thing he did as a toddler, testing and pushing, using his body, but now he's doing it with words, I was able then to remain more calm. I didn't like it, and I still found it frustrating, but I was able to see it in a different way, meaning that I looked at it as he's just trying to figure out where's the boundary, where's the wall, when is it going to be too much, what is working and what isn't working. So that is something that I think is really important for us to recognize as parents, rather than taking that as a personal attack on us, looking at it through a different lens and seeing it as a developmentally normal behavior for this age, that they're just trying to figure out the rules and how powerful these words are, just like they did with their hands and their feet and their teeth when they were toddlers. Another tip for preschoolers when they're having those big emotions is to remain and be the calm in their storm. Just because they have these big vocabularies doesn't mean that they aren't, as I mentioned earlier, going to be prone to these big emotions and fall down those steps into the bottom part of the brain. We still need to be the calm in the storm, help them regulate, and then have those tough conversations later when everybody's in a better mood. One of the most useful tips that I have for parents who have debaters is to use the broken record technique. Okay, so for example, my son, I want a cookie. Well, we're not going to have a cookie right now because we're going to have dinner in about 15 minutes, but I want a cookie. Instead of having this back and forth, I said, no, not right now, where things just escalate. I used a one-liner from Love and Logic. I love you too much to argue with you. He'd say, but Mom, I love you too much to argue with you. But if you just let me, I love you too much to argue with you. That did not take much energy on my part to continue to say the same thing over and over. And after a period of time, he started to learn that when I would say that one-liner, I love you too much to argue with you, that meant I'm not going to win this argument with my mom. You know that technique is working when they say, I hate it when you say that, and walk away. So that is my tip when you have a debater, is to use a one-liner. I love you too much to argue with you. And remember, you got to say it in a calm voice. Now, if you're feeling really frustrated and overwhelmed, then you don't want to even try that technique, right? Saying, I love you too much to argue with you isn't sending the message of being the calm in the storm. So here's a tip to try to avoid power struggles with your preschooler. Use enforceable statements. This is a technique straight out of the Love and Logic program, which if you haven't been able to tell, I really, really like a lot, especially for the younger children. So an example of an enforceable statement would be that if your little one says, hey Mom, I want to play on the iPad, and you don't want them to play on the iPad because they need to pick up the mess that they've made in the living room. Instead of saying, you need to pick up your toys first, right? Which is going to set up a battle, because the little one's going to be like, well, I don't want to pick up my toys first. I just want to play on the iPad, where we're going to get into that power struggle, the words, the arguing. Instead, use that enforceable statement. Sure, you may feel free to play on the iPad after you've picked the toys up off the floor. Absolutely. Do you see how that little shift can change the dynamic there. Now, they're going to still try to debate. Well, but I don't want to blah, 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 blah. Oh, I love you too much to argue with you. So you can use the enforceable statement and then the broken record, right? So that your little one over time will start to learn, when I hear these things, I'm best be doing it if I want to get what I want. Now, if they choose that they don't want to do it and they want to go someplace else and do something else, whatever. But the idea here is to try to avoid that constant arguing that we end up with our preschoolers. So, enforceable statements. Okay, so that was a shorty today. I hope that you found this information helpful. I know that when my little ones were in the preschooler stages, I just really found that to be so exhausting. It was like this constantly. It just never stopped. And when I started implementing some of these different strategies, it really, really, really led to so much less frustration for all of us. So I hope you found these tips helpful. Now, if you like this information, go ahead and give it a like, and better yet, subscribe to my channel. I would appreciate that. It helps me rise from the depths of the YouTube ocean and get my information out in front of other parents who are looking for support. Now, if you happen to be a parent who is like, wow, this all sounds great, but I might need some support while I'm implementing it, then you might want to think about joining the Mentor Mom Academy, a low-cost membership program where you get coaching from me every single month as a part of a group. So if you're interested in that, I've put the link below. All right, that does it for today. Until next time, I'll see you then.